Hello everyone and welcome to another wildflower video here on NHSN's YouTube channel. Really excited to pick this up and fresh from our little video on snowdrops a few weeks ago, and fittingly, as we're in the depths of winter, I thought this week we'd take a look at something seasonal and rather pretty, crocuses. We're just coming into crocus season now, with several species beginning to bloom across the northeast. And while not strictly wildflowers, these are some of our most frequently introduced alien plants, um, and frequently escape into the wild, whether as garden discards or historic introductions. This means that they are worth recording in some settings, particularly old churchyards, established parkland, and definitely if you find them in woodland or a similar place. As you'll see in a bit, crocuses are actually quite a diverse bunch. So kicking us off, we'll look at crocuses boasting white, lilac or purple flowers. And to start with, we have the species which, in my limited experience at least, you're most likely to encounter just about anywhere across the region, the spring crocus. Now, this one was only recently separated from another species, Crocus vernus, the white crocus, which can be very, very similar. Both are large crocuses with goblet-shaped flowers in shades of purple right the way through to white, so quite variable. Despite these similarities, there are a couple of ways you can go about separating the two. Firstly, by looking down at the petal tube, down here at the flower base. Here you'll notice this is a rather striking purple colour. In Crocus vernus, this is predominantly white or lilac with just a hint of purple. Next up with this species, the real clincher. And now you've looked at the petal tube, which is hopefully purple, you want to look at the feathery stigma right there in the centre of the flower, noting whether it's equal to or longer than the surrounding stamens or shorter. If yours is roughly equal to or noticeably longer, you're most certainly looking at spring crocus. Linking to the former species, here is a closer look at Crocus vernus, the white crocus. Don't be fooled by their name. You do get white forms of spring crocus, and equally I have seen purple forms of white crocus. It's all very confusing. But again, look at the petal tube, which here has far less purple, a purple wash as opposed to a solid block of colour as we saw in the former species. Next, you can look at that stigma again, which here, if you'll excuse my very poor photography, you'll note is shorter than the surrounding stamens. Couple this with your observations of the petal tube as well as the size and shape of the flower, and you can be fairly confident you've got this species. Though I should say that in my experience, it is far rarer than spring crocus. Next up, we have the early crocus, Crocus thomasinianus, a rather common and I think rather lovely species, frequently seen in great drifts through churchyard, woodland, and parkland. It's actually the crocus most likely to naturalize in a whole host of settings, and you often see it in a real abundance in sort of forgotten habitats. The first thing you'll note about this one is that it has smaller flowers than the two we looked at previously, and its petals are lilac, or at least very pale purple, by no means dark purple as in spring crocus. These stand in sharp contrast to the lovely orange reproductive parts you see there in the centre of the flower. Once you get your eye in, you'll notice the species straight away, but to be extra sure, once again, you need to look at that petal tube. And here it is. Here you'll notice that the petal tube in this species is almost entirely white, if not entirely white. Not washed purple and not deep purple like that of spring crocus. This, coupled with general observations on size and colour, is all there is to it in this case. A rarer species now, and one you're quite unlikely to see in a wild state, but it is possible. This is Cibers crocus, Crocus ciberi. And this is really an attractive little plant, which is widely available in horticulture, meaning that in theory it could pop up in the same places as the other ones, perhaps in amenity plantings or neglected gardens. Rather nicely, this one stands out from a mile away on account of its yellow petal tube, and shown to the right here, actually, and yellow center to the flowers. I'm not sure why, but this one always reminds me of a sort of fried egg. It really is quite a bonny plant. Cibers crocus is a fairly distinctive plant, but if there is one species you're likely to confuse with it, it may well be this one, the silvery crocus, Crocus biflorus. This is another rarity, and with that yellow throat to the flower, may look a little bit like the previous species. However, you should see here a series of dark purple stripes running vertically up the outer petals. This is a feature, at least to my knowledge, absent in Cibers crocus. And that's that for the purple and white crocuses. From here on out, all of the species you're likely to see are yellow in colour and stand out from some distance away. The first of these, and by far the most abundant in our region on account of its frequent use in landscaping, is this one, the yellow crocus. Truth be told, this one is virtually identical to another species, a somewhat rarer one, the golden crocus, you'll see shortly, but to tell them apart, a bit of detective work is needed. With yellow crocus, the first thing you want to do is look at those outer petals. In this particular hybrid, I should have said it's a hybrid of cultivated origin, there should be a limited amount of brown smudging present. This often extends up onto the upper portions of the petal, but the important word here is limited. It's by no means extensive. You'll see why shortly. Perhaps more appropriate if you're planting bulbs yourself in your garden, the real clincher with this pair is actually the crocus culm. In this one, you'll notice that the papery covering encasing the culm splits vertically, forming fissures running vertically up the bulb. Bear this in mind when we look at the next one. Second to last, we have what I think might be one of the most attractive crocuses liable to occur in the British countryside, the golden crocus. And as you can see, this one is very, very similar to the yellow crocus we looked at previously. But it does importantly boast a far more extensive area of brown on the outer petals, a solid block shown here as opposed to a half-hearted smudge. To be extra sure, however, you do need to check the culms again. And here you have one. Hopefully you can see here that unlike the vertical splits of the yellow crocus, in this one the culm casing splits horizontally, forming bands around the bulb. I should stress at this stage that digging up any flower, regardless if it is non-native, is definitely frowned upon. Perhaps this characteristic is best explored when purchasing bulbs yourself, and certainly both of these species are available to buy for gardens if you know where to look. To finish up, one final crocus, and a bit of a pesky one, if that. Should you notice a crocus with what can only be described as faded, perhaps creamy yellow flowers, it is highly likely to be this one, the snow crocus, another cultivated hybrid that, in all honesty, can come in shades of purple too, but most often I encounter it as its sort of creamy yellow variety. With this one, you want to note the relatively broad goblet shape of the flowers, and of course the yellow centre, similar to that of Cibers crocus we looked at previously. While I don't have a picture of it, I very, very rarely see this one out there in a wild state. The petal tube should also have a purplish wash to it, like some of those we looked at previously, but obviously quite unique when compared with yellow petals. But with that, Thank you so much for listening. Regardless of whether you're a keen amateur botanist or someone who just has a passing interest in plants, I hope you find videos like this useful and look forward to sharing more of these with you very soon. But until then, goodbye.